Sometimes life takes everything from you, your home, your job, your hope, until all that's left is survival. Richard Brener knew that feeling too well. At 54, he was a widowed father scraping against rock bottom. Once a hard-working factory man, he'd lost his wife to cancer, his house to medical bills, and his pride when the factory he'd served for 23 years shut its doors. With only his quiet 11-year-old son, Caleb, and $247 in his bank account, Richard clung to one desperate idea: buy something, anything that could keep them off the streets. That's when he saw it, a county auction listing for a condemned property in a dying town called Meadowbrook. The price? $100. The photos looked like nightmares: broken windows, a sagging roof, mold-stained walls, but it had 4 walls and a door, and that was enough. When he handed over the crumpled bills at the county clerk's office, the woman behind the desk gave him a pitying look. "You know, that place has history," she said softly. "People saw lights in it at night. No one's wanted it in years." Richard smiled thinly. "Good, maybe the ghosts will pay rent." That afternoon, with Caleb silent beside him, their truck rolled up the cracked driveway to the house at 412 Sycamore Street, a place swallowed by weeds and shadows. The air inside smelled of rot and neglect. But what Richard and his son found when they pushed open that swollen wooden door would change everything. Because huddled in the dim light against the far wall were 5 small children, dirty, silent, and terrified, staring back at them as if they were ghosts themselves. For a heartbeat, Richard thought his tired mind was playing tricks. The children were so still, so silent, they seemed unreal. But then the smallest, a boy no older than 4, blinked, and Richard's breath caught. They were alive. 5 of them. A girl of about 9 sat protectively in front, arms around 2 younger twins. Beside them was another girl, maybe 7, and the little boy, thumb in mouth, eyes wide with hunger and fear. Their clothes were torn, their shoes mismatched, faces pale beneath grime. Caleb whispered, "Dad, they're scared." Richard nodded slowly, raising his hands in peace. "It's okay," he said softly. "My name's Richard. This is my son Caleb. We didn't know anyone was here." The oldest girl's eyes flicked to the door, calculating, protective. "Are you hungry?" Richard asked, a flicker of movement. The small one licked his cracked lips. Richard sent Caleb for their cooler, brought back crackers and water, and set them gently on the floor. Nobody moved until Caleb, with quiet bravery, sat cross-legged, opened a cracker, and began eating. "You can have some," he said. "We have more." The youngest boy's hand crept forward. Then the dam broke. In seconds, the children were sharing crackers, passing water, eating like they hadn't in days. Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. Hunger, yes, but this was deeper. These kids had been surviving alone, taking care of each other. "What are your names?" he asked. The oldest looked up at him with ancient eyes. "Iris," she said hoarsely. "That's Brooke, Tyler, Trevor, and Simon." "Where are your parents?" Richard asked. Iris's face hardened. "Gone." Her tone made it clear she didn't know where, and she didn't trust anyone enough to find out. Richard should have called the police. Any reasonable person would have. 5 abandoned children in a condemned house. It was a legal and moral nightmare. But when Iris whispered, "No police, they'll split us up," he hesitated. The words came from somewhere deep, fear and memory intertwined. He'd seen what foster care did to kids when families broke apart. So instead of reaching for his phone, he reached for the camping lantern in the truck. "We'll stay the night," he said quietly. Caleb looked up, hopeful. With them. That night, under flickering lamplight, the house became a fragile sanctuary. The children huddled together like a small flock of frightened birds. Brooke wept softly as she bit into an apple. Iris whispered, "It's okay. She'll come back. Mama always comes back. Richard understood then these kids weren't just hiding from the world. They were waiting for someone who might never return. The next morning he drove to town for supplies. The old clerk at the general store watched him fill a cart with bulk rice and peanut butter. "That's a lot of food for 2 people," she said. "We eat a lot," Richard replied, lying badly. When she told him about the house's dark history, a woman and her children who vanished after years of abuse, his stomach sank. Back at the house, the truth began to surface. Iris led him to the porch and told him about her mother's boyfriend, a violent man they'd escaped from, and how their mother, Danielle, left them here to find money and come back soon. She never did. In her pocket, Iris carried a small N. Notebook, the first page read in desperate handwriting, "Keep them safe. I'll come back, I promise." 3 days later, a knock echoed through the fragile walls. The children froze, panic flooding their faces. Richard opened the door to find an old man with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. "Name's George," he said, tipping his hat. "Live next door, saw you move in. You've got your hands full." George wasn't there to judge, he was there to help. He'd known the family who'd lived there before, tried to intervene when the mother's boyfriend turned violent but couldn't. "If those kids are back," he said, "I want to make it right this time." Against every instinct to keep quiet, Richard let him in. By the next morning, George returned with tools and 2 friends. They repaired the porch, replaced the window glass, patched the leaking roof. "You can't save everyone," George told Richard, hammering a nail into the new railing, "but sometimes you can save the ones in front of you." Soon the house began to breathe again. The children stopped hiding when George came by. Simon followed him around like a shadow. The twins giggled when his friend snuck them peppermints, and Iris began slowly to trust. Then Richard found something buried under the basement debris. A letter from County Social Services addressed to Danielle Garrett. It warned her that failure to comply with child safety orders would result in removal of her children. Richard realized Danielle hadn't abandoned them. She'd run from a system she believed would destroy her family. He showed the letter to Iris, and for the first time she cried. "She tried," she whispered. "She really tried." And in that moment, Richard knew he wasn't just sheltering kids, he was protecting someone's last act of love. Word travels fast in small towns, and soon Meadowbrook began to stir. Diane, the store clerk, came by one morning with boxes of donated clothes. "You didn't know, did you?" she said softly. "Those kids, they're Paul Garrett's grandchildren, the old Sheriff S." The revelation stunned Richard. The town had loved Sheriff Garrett, a man known for fairness and decency. Now his grandchildren were living in that same condemned house, forgotten. But not anymore. One by one, the townspeople stepped forward. Mrs. Alvarez, a retired teacher, knocked on the door with lesson books in hand. "They should be learning," she said. "Let me teach them." Richard tried to refuse payment, but she smiled. "I'm not asking for money. I'm paying back an old debt to their grandfather." And just like that, the house came alive again, laughter, lessons, and the faint rhythm of healing. The kids began to smile. Brooke whispered her first words in months. The twins read aloud together. Simon learned to write his name. Caleb became their anchor, the big brother every one of them needed. And Richard, the man who had once believed his life was over, began to see something new forming in the ruins, a family. Still, he knew the illusion couldn't last forever. Without legal papers, one visit from social services could tear it all apart. He needed help, and soon. Richard drove to the county seat, desperate for answers. A family lawyer named Patricia Yates listened to his story in silence, then said, You're breaking about a dozen laws, Mr. Brener, but maybe for the right reasons. She handed him forms. Apply for emergency foster care. It's a long shot. You need proof the children are better off with you, community support, stable housing. You've got two of those. Get the third. Richard promised he would, but before he could act, George called. There's a sheriff's car in your driveway. Panic surged. When Richard arrived, Officer Andrea Kelsey stood on the porch, young, calm, sharp-eyed. "You're Richard Brener?" she asked. "I worked under Sheriff Paul Garrett before he died, heard his grandkids might be here." Richard hesitated, then told her everything. To his shock, Andrea didn't arrest him. Instead, she pulled from her jacket a worn leather journal. "Paul Garrett S.," she said. "Read the last page." Inside were words written months before the old sheriff's death, a father's final confession. "If my daughter ever has children she cannot care for, I pray someone will protect them, keep them together, save them from the system that breaks more than it mends." When Richard looked up, Andrea's eyes were wet. "You've got 2 weeks," she said quietly. "Make this legal, fix the house, show me you can do this. I won't come back before then." And just like that, she was gone. 2 weeks. 14 days to turn a condemned house into a home, and to prove to the world that broken people could still build something unbreakable. Those 2 weeks became a storm of hammer blows and sleepless nights. George rallied the town, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, everyone who'd ever owed Sheriff Garrett a favor showed up. The broken house began to shine again. Walls painted, power R. Restored, floors repaired. Mrs. Alvarez tutored the kids while Richard worked construction jobs by day and repaired the home by night. Caleb led the younger ones through chores and stories. Every hand, every heart in Meadowbrook seemed to join in one shared mission: keep those kids together. When the county inspector finally arrived, the place wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Clean, safe, warm. There was laughter in the air and the smell of breakfast on the stove. That same night, as the children slept, Richard sat on the porch beside George. "You think it'll be enough?" he asked. George smiled at the stars. "Maybe not for the system," he said, "but it's enough for them." And then, as if scripted by fate, headlights appeared down the road. Andrea's cruiser pulled up, slow and deliberate. She walked through the house in silence, checking outlets, testing water, watching the kids read with Mrs. Alvarez. Finally, she turned to Richard. "You did it," she said softly. "I don't know how, but you did." Then she handed him a folder signed Emergency Foster Approval. Richard exhaled for the first time in weeks, his shoulders trembling with relief. "You bought a condemned house," Andrea said with a small smile, "and somehow built a family." Months later, the house at 412 Sycamore Street no longer looked condemned. Fresh paint gleamed where rot had been. Children's laughter filled the air. A man who'd once been broken beyond repair had found purpose in saving others. Richard stood on that porch one golden afternoon, watching Caleb chase the twins through the yard, Brooke reading to Simon on the steps, and Iris, no longer fearful, but proud, helping Mrs. Alvarez hang laundry. He thought of Louise, his late wife, and knew she'd be smiling. Life had taken everything from him once, but in giving, he'd gained it all back. Sometimes second chances don't come wrapped in miracles. Sometimes they come in the shape of a condemned house, a frightened child, or a stranger willing to care. As the camera fades on the house, the screen would linger on one thing: the old wooden sign George carved by hand and nailed beside the door. It read, "Home." He bought a condemned house for $100 and built a legacy that will outlive him. If you believe hope can start anywhere, prove it. Like the video, subscribe for more true stories that remind us what humanity still looks like. and share this one with someone who needs to hear it tonight.